Hi, everyone. To celebrate 30 years of assembly, we have wanted to bring different perspectives to digital creativity and using art and code, art and tech in different ways. Tyler will be joining us from Austin, Texas, and talking about different AI tools in game development and concepting. Welcome, Tyler.
Welcome, Tyler.
How's it going, everyone? I'm excited to be here. I've followed assembly for years, huge fan of the demo scene, so just being involved in any way for me is such an honor. So I'm here to talk about all sorts of fun AI tools, a lot of stuff that's very cutting edge, coming out in the past couple months. So without further ado, let me go ahead and get us started. So this talk is primarily for game dev, only because I come from a game dev background, but it also applies to pretty much any kind of creative workflow. So just a little bit about me. My name's Tyler. I'm an indie game dev. I've been running my own little studio for over a decade. I'm also a professor of game development at University of Texas here in Austin. So I teach all sorts of game classes, AI classes, all sorts of good stuff like that. I've also been a procedural generation, generative art, demo scene enthusiast for years. I've done all sorts of stuff, dating back 12, 15 years, just kind of playing with all these fun kind of generative systems. So this has kind of always been a thing for me. I've known of demo scene, but as many of you know, in the US, it's just not quite as popular. So it's very exciting, again, to be here with you all. So today we're going to be covering the wide world of weird AI tools, and that is weird AI, not Weird Al. So we're going to be talking about all sorts of fun stuff. Some of you may have heard of things like DALL-E, MidJourney, GPT. We're going to kind of talk about all these different tools and fun ways that you can use them. This QR code, I'm going to go ahead and post this in the Discord as well. This is a big list of links. I'm going to be covering a lot of stuff. There's going to be a lot of links kind of in this talk. So this is just a doc with all of that with kind of notes and helpful tricks. So if you miss anything, you can go check out that QR code later and get all that wonderful information. So, I'm going to be talking about AIs, so I wanted to ask the AI what it thought about this topic. So the question is, we're talking about AI tools for creativity, for art, for code, for all that good stuff. So I also went ahead and asked OpenAI's GPT-3, which is a text generation system, why it thinks AI tools are important. So from GPT, it pretty much covers exactly what I would have said. It's really great for inspiration. It's helpful for kind of refining, tweaking, maybe changing some wording or changing parts of an image. Eventually, it gets to the point where you can start automating tasks. You need 30 variations of the same thing. It can make them for you instead of manually doing each one. So it allows you to be more creative because it helps kind of fill some of those gaps. So thank you, GPT. You covered it for me. So some of the stuff I'm going to cover today. I'm going to talk about ethical and legal concerns. There is kind of some murky gray areas in the world of AI creativity. We're going to look at 2D image tools, DALL-E, MidJourney, Diffusion, all those good ones. Text and code, so GPT-3 and GitHub. And then we'll look at a little bit of music and audio. This is kind of the last interesting frontier, I think, for AI tools. But we'll look at some of the new tools that are out there as well. So first up, before we look at all these tools, kind of a question I want to ask to you, to the world, to anyone listening, where does this output come from? If I'm making art, if I'm making, audio, if I'm making code, where is this actually occurring from? How does it create this stuff in the first place? And the answer is really, it comes down to understanding how these AI works, specifically kind of machine learning formats of AI. I'm going to post, again, these links are all in that doc. But the first and most important thing is kind of neural networks. So neural networks are an attempt to sort of mimic the same patterns a brain uses, so the connection of neurons and kind of the pathways that they create. This YouTube video is a really good explainer. It kind of walks through the basics in just a minute or two.
Neural networks are made up of layers of neurons. These neurons are the core processing units of the network. First, we have the input layer, which receives the input. The output layer predicts our final output. In between exist the hidden layers which perform most of the computations required by our network. Here's an image of a circle. This image is composed of 28 by 28 pixels, which make up for 784 pixels. Each pixel is fed as input to each neuron of the first layer. Neurons of one layer are connected to neurons of the next layer through channels. Each of these channels is assigned a numerical value known as weight. The inputs are multiplied to the corresponding weights, and their sum is sent as input to the neurons in the hidden layer. Each of these neurons is associated with a numerical value called the bias, which is then added to the input sum. This value is then passed through a threshold function called the activation function. The result of the activation function determines if the particular neuron will get activated or not. An activated neuron transmits data to the neurons of the next layer over the channels. In this manner, the data is propagated through the network. This is called forward propagation. In the output layer, the neuron with the highest...
So I'm not going to go through watching the whole thing, but the important thing to understand is you kind of give an input, so an image of a circle. It goes through these kind of hidden layers. They're propagated by the network itself to an output layer to decide what is the thing. So you give it an image of a circle, it says it's an image of a circle. With most neural networks, it doesn't always get it right. So they use what's called back propagation, which is just a system of then sending back information to say, no, that wasn't correct. It adjusts values, or yes, it was correct. And it kind of changes weights to those hidden layers until it becomes more accurate. So, again, neural networks have many, many layers like this. It's not just one single one. You end up with dozens. And because of that, it's kind of a magic black box for the creators, because those different layers of neural networks internally, no one has like an exact map of them, right? You can't kind of follow through the process when it creates image of dog. So it's kind of best understood as this, starting, input, going to an output. Another kind of popular term, you'll see a lot of these, is GANs, generative adversarial networks. I like to call these PvP neural networks, because really what they are is they're two different neural networks combating the generative one and the adversarial one. So the generative network is saying, this is an image of a dog. The adversarial network looks at it and says, no, it's not. That's an image, of a circle. And so then it comes back, the generative one tries again, and it keeps trying and keeps getting closer and closer until it fools the adversarial network into believing the thing that it made is similar to images of dogs. And then lastly, diffusion models. So diffusion models actually start with noise. They start just kind of like white noise, Perlin noise, something like that. And they work towards whatever the prompt was given or whatever the goal is. And the way they do this is they've actually worked their way back. So they start with an image, that image goes to noise, and they learn from that process to be able to reverse it. So going from noise to the image occurs because they started with an image and took it to noise. And again, links explaining these further are in that doc with the QR code, which is also in the Discord. So here's the thing that's really important to understand. Artificial intelligence is gained by experience, right? You're feeding it all these different things, it kind of learns from them. So they are kind of gaining experience, right? They're learning as they go. A lot like a child, right? A lot like a baby that watches people walk, watches people talk, watches people eat, and it learns from kind of examples, learns from seeing other things. But just like a child, it can be fed positive experiences, right? You can take a child for a walk in the park, you can feed it carrots, right? But it can also be fed negative experiences. So this is Taybot. This was a Microsoft chatbot. If you haven't heard of it before, it's like 4chan or someone got a hold of it and fed it all these negative experiences, and it became this terrible, awful Twitter bot that was saying all this deplorable shit. And it was because, again, someone was feeding it bad experiences. So the AI doesn't understand right or wrong, right? It's not given an understanding of moral and ethical concerns. It's just given data. So we give it data, we give it images of dogs, right? Images of horses, whatever, pretty pictures, and it uses that data to output. Unfortunately, that means that bias can occur, right? The amount of data you give it, that kind of initial data, can create those kind of unexpected, what I would call bad experiences. So this is an example from a tool, ArtBreeder, where you can kind of give it a desired race or an ethnicity. And you can see by doing kind of young male here, some some ethnicities it can understand better, others it kind of fails on. DALL-E, the tool by OpenAI, has also kind of approached this issue of if you give it the prompt of a builder, it's kind of all these old white guys. If you give it a flight attendant, it becomes more like Asian-focused women. So it has these problems, and it's all because of the data it's given originally. So those millions of images it's kind of first given will change the output. Another kind of wild example is like this was a beautiful painting of a horse while a plane flies overhead. But sometimes it's little things, right? It's not necessarily people, but like this plane doesn't look like it's flying, right? It's maybe doing something else. So like sometimes that bias comes out in portraits, in faces of people. Sometimes it comes out in paintings. It can come out in all sorts of content. So, we talked about this kind of training set, the idea that it needs this experience. So all of these tools come with these training sets, usually hundreds of thousands, millions, even billions of images, text, bits of code, whatever it may be. So what's really convenient, we have this tool from the LAION group. This is actually a viewable, searchable set for their algorithm. So we can see their training set. So I can search image of horse. These are all the images of horse that are in its training set. So it used all of these images to be able to generate horse, right? So this is really helpful to be able to look through and kind of see the things that are in it. And you can start seeing issues with potential bias, with copyright, with all sorts of issues like that. Hundreds of images of Mickey Mouse. Disney's probably not going to like that, right? So you run into a lot of these issues with, if I'm going to take 1 million photos off the internet, sometimes I might get a photo or two that shouldn't be in there. So the other kind of big ethical legal concern is like, I can just type in any old idea, right? I can just type in, I want an image of a horse, and the image appears and it's mine, right? I own it, I get full credit, I don't have to tell anyone else where it came from. This is where it also gets a little tricky because there isn't really a legal precedent right now on the ownership of these images. So I'm talking about images specifically, but this also applies to text, to code, to any sort of generative system using primarily an AI and a neural network that's built on other people's images, other people's code, other people's text, right? The US Copyright Office has said you can't copyright AI-only art. So specifically, they were saying a human has to be involved. Somewhere a human has to be part of the process. But the real question at that point is, what does that mean, right? Are you part of the process or not? So if I just write in an image of a horse, is that enough to say a human made this? If I just wrote those words down and pressed go, or do I need to do more for it to really be considered partially human-made? And like, are you the artist? Are you the creator? Or are you the patron, right? Are you paying an artist to create the art? So these questions, like, they don't really have an answer yet. All these kind of concerns are still being debated, still being discussed. And we don't really have an answer. Like, there's no one answer to go to at the moment. So just something to be aware of while going forward. So I think as creators, we should consider the importance of all of the work that goes into it. Know that it was millions of photos, other people's photos used to create this art. Millions of lines of text other people wrote, other people's stories, other people's novels used to generate your novel. But how attribution works, how royalties work, probably going to be a decision made at a much higher level than just us individually. So how do I think you should use these tools to kind of avoid these problems? For me, the big thing is use them in the beginning, right? Ideation, prototyping, the initial phases of whatever you're making, be it a game, be it a song, be it a film. Use it for storyboarding, use it for concept art, use it for the process where you're just kind of figuring out what you want to make, what it's going to look like, what it's going to sound like, feel like. It's really great for them because then you can remove the AI created content, right? You can replace it with stuff made bespoke specifically for your project. And so you can get it a kind of a lot better built for exactly what you're making. And then hopefully that means that if there are any issues with copyrights, royalties, credits, you'll have removed anything that was part of that process, and it becomes no different from an artist having multiple images that they're using as reference when creating their piece. So I'm done talking ethical, legal, moral. Let's have some fun with some cool tools. So I'm going to provide links again throughout this next bit. They're all on that QR code, that doc. So feel free to kind of go through that doc as I'm covering these, click on those links, check them out yourselves. I'd also recommend we can use the seminars channel in the Assembly Discord to share stuff that we've created along the way. So if you make something cool with one of these tools, share it there. Let's fill that channel with some fun art and text and all sorts of good stuff. So I'm going to talk through some of the tools that exist right now, some of the more popular ones. First up is ArtBreeder. So you can get to this from artbreeder.com. It has multiple generative adversarial networks built on different kind of training sets. So it has one for portraits, one for buildings, one for furries, one for anime, right? And so you can kind of choose a specific one and play with it to create things of that type. It has 3 settings: compose, upload, and animate. Compose lets you kind of fine tune it. Upload lets you upload your own image, so your own face to, animate it or whatever you want to do. And then for some of them, you can animate and kind of create this like GIF animation going through these faces. So one of the cool things for this system is the breeding. So it allows you to take 2 different images or multiple images and kind of assign them as parents and say, like, maybe I have this one image and it has a tree on the left and a building on the right, and another one, it's just a really cool like cyberpunk aesthetic. I can kind of play with giving it the content and the style and kind of mix around. So here, as an example, we have this wild, crazy, blown out image of a bridge and this pretty kind of standard image of a building. So I've given it fully the content slider to that building and fully the style to that bridge, and I end up with this image, which is sort of, the crazy, wild, green, blown out style, but with the content of this building. ArtBreeder also has these genes, which are kind of those connections to those nodes, if you remember that kind of circle example from earlier. So these genes are actually created by the users. So people who play around with ArtBreeder will make 100 portraits, all with red hair, and then they'll say this is a red hair gene. And they'll tell the neural network all of these images have that gene, so you can kind of label that area and be able to tweak it. If you pay for ArtBreeder, you can also create your own genes, which is wonderful. I've personally made a whole bunch of alien portraits by kind of defining genes of saying, like, this is blue skin, or this is scaly kind of lizard skin, or, kind of rised forehead Star Trek style. And the important thing to remember with this, just like the previous example, the AI doesn't know what these are, right? It doesn't know what an eye is. It doesn't know what red hair is. You have to find hundreds of pictures that are the thing that you want, and then tell it, hey, all of these match blank gene, and that's how it learns what a gene is and how it makes it available. ArtBreeder also just released this new feature called Collage. This one's really cool. You kind of just draw rough shapes, right? A little red color, little black circles. And then it generates using those shapes as kind of the style structure of the image that you want. You also give these prompts, so you say a red sports car, you draw the red area, you draw the gray area, it spits out a sports car. Now you can see kind of, it doesn't always get exactly maybe the desired outcome. I would assume the back of the car is supposed to be on the right here, but it put it on the front. So results may vary, but this is really cool for getting kind of the exact composition that you want. And again, this link is in the QR code doc. So next up, MidJourney. I'm hoping some people here have already used MidJourney. It's fantastic. It's a ton of fun to play with. It has a lot of different styles, a lot of cool things you can do with it. It's a Discord bot. Originally, you had to use the MidJourney Discord, their server, but it's gotten so big at this point, they've now opened it up to other servers. I'm going to post a link as well to a server that I've created that you're welcome to join, and you can kind of play around with MidJourney if you haven't already. There's also a bunch of wonderful extra links. There's the documentation. There's this really cool page that kind of goes through all the different styles you can try. So different wordings, made of charcoal, drawn by Salvador Dali. You can kind of get a lot of really cool properties and tweaks by kind of choosing these different settings, glossy versus rough versus, translucent. And so there's a lot of these wonderful documentation pages that show you ways to do that. And once you start getting really complex with something like this, there's also tools to help you build your prompt. So that line of text that you give to the device to create the image, this site prompt builder is wonderful for that, because you can kind of pick and choose all the different aesthetic elements that you want. Say like, I want colorful 8-bit just kind of pick and choose those things, copy paste that, drop it into MidJourney, get a lot of great stuff. Next up, Disco Diffusion. So Disco Diffusion is a Google Colab. So it's actually a clip-based system that you can access through Colab. Colab is a tool from Google where you can kind of run these things on their servers, which is fantastic because it requires a pretty heavy GPU to run. So quite often this thing is giving you these like kind of ML heavy, AI heavy GPUs, V100, A100, these $10,000 GPUs. And you can pay anywhere between $10 to $50 a month to get access to this. What's really nice about tools like Disco Diffusion is you do not need to know how to code to use this. You just go to the different areas where you kind of fill in the blanks, checkbox the things, type in kind of the name of the prompt you want here. Say, and then just run all, and it'll go through and create that image. Once you've played around with it, kind of made your basic first image or two, you can start playing around with different settings, the size of the image, the quality of the image. There's a ton of fine-tuning that you can do with Disco Diffusion, as well as once you've kind of played with it and you like it, there's a lot of wonderful resources for it. So there's 2 tutorials. Again, these are all in that doc, but these will kind of walk you through really kind of the advanced methods that you can do with it. There's this amazing artist study that's been going on for I think like 6 months now, where they have gone through and taken pretty much any name of an artist you could think of, different styles, cyberpunk or solar punk or things like that, Polaroid, and they've kind of tested the new image prompts on all of them so you can see what each name does and kind of what styles do that, which is really great for when you want like a very specific look, right? You want a colorful look, you want this kind of maybe looks like it's made of Play-Doh. You can start playing with these different settings and these different names to get your desired outcome. There's also a ton of other Google collabs. So if you shell out the $10 to $50 a month for the collab experience, not only is there Disco, but there are just dozens of these other diffusion models, a lot of them trained off of Disco Diffusion. I highly recommend Jack's Diffusion, but there's also these specified ones like floral, textile, pixel art, medieval art, portraits. So if there's a particular type of thing you're looking for, right? You really want lithography. There's a specifically built model just for that. Next up, DALL-E 2. So I'm sure most of you, some of you at least, have heard of DALL-E 2. This one's been around for a good bit of time, but it is currently kind of a private beta. You have to request to access it. It takes a few months, but it's a pretty fantastic little tool. You can do a photograph of the assembly demo scene party. Give a text. Takes a few moments, outputs results. The coolest things about DALL-E are actually its in-painting tools, which I'll show a little bit later. But this one is quite advanced when it comes to its output. You pay about 13 cents per image you generate. So here's our wonderful assemblies. It doesn't quite get text right yet, but it can create a lot of really interesting things. Stable Diffusion, this one is coming out soon. They just announced the next stage in their beta. This one does a lot of really cool visual styles. They're also working to make that kind of training set and that back-end process more in a public domain, kind of open copyright format, as a way to deal with sort of the legal and ethical concerns of creating this type of art. So this one, again, links in that doc, but you can sign up for the beta. I'm hoping in the next few months it becomes more publicly accessible, because it is a lot of fun to play with. Those of you who have used MidJourney, it's very similar. So I also, before this talk, kind of just put together a quick model comparison. So, there's a lot of models here that I'm talking about for creating this kind of art. So I give them all the same prompts just to see kind of what the different output would be. So you can kind of see like each one has its own unique look and aesthetic. And this is important to understand, right? It's not about just like finding the best one. You don't just go to the one that's the most, high-tech or newest out, because you may want a specific aesthetic, right? DALL-E kind of created these wild Rubik's cubes. MidJourney created these very like painterly textures. So like it really does depend on what you're looking for. And I've personally found that I use all of these tools interchangeably and kind of switch up based on what my desired outcome is. All right, so I want to talk briefly about some things that these tools currently are struggling with, because as cool as they are, they do still have a couple faults. First up, words. That right now, just like getting exact text as you want, it struggles with. A lot of times it'll hit the letters that you asked for. So I gave a benchmark. You get some of the letters, right? We got Brank here. That's close enough, right? Same thing with like, just alphabet soup with these letters in it. You get some of the letters perhaps, but then it just kind of goes off script and throws in whatever it makes sense. So it also, they struggle with negation, the idea of, a plate with no bananas on it. It actually did really good at that one, right? Like a lot of these plates are banana-less, but they included a banana next to the plate. Then with the orange juice glass, not so much, right? Glass without orange juice, most of those glasses are filled with juice. So again, it struggles with these certain kinds of phrasings, quantity, 3 white flowers, 1 green apple, 1 red apple. You'll see here that, it really struggles getting those exact quantities down. Some of them are close, right? It seems to really like 3 apples specifically, DALL-E does. Stable Diffusion did a wonderful job on the 3 white flowers, completely ignored the apples. So, these are just kind of layers of complexity when giving a prompt that these image tools can struggle with. Prepositions saying where something is, a tree to the right of, a thing inside of, a thing on top of. Again, sometimes it just struggles with the placement of items. So we have a bench facing a pond to the left with a tree on the right. And so a few of these are close, right? Like this is the tree on the right, the bench is facing the pond. It generally understands what you're after, but it is sort of random whether you get those things on the side that you asked for. And then, of course, just general complexity. So, photograph of a book on a desk in an office with photos and paintings on the wall and fluorescent lighting, right? It's a lot of things for a single image to deal with. And as you can see from these images, it got a lot of it, right? Most of these have maybe 5 out of the 6 things I'm asking for. But then a few of them, like the wall here is the book, right? The desk is the book here. So sometimes it just kind of mixes those layers of complexity. But maybe that's what you want, right? I personally love these types of images. When it comes out with like a book wall, hey, that's cool. I never would have thought of that, right? Maybe I'm going to go in that direction now and play around with kind of this image result because that's way cooler than anything I thought of. So let's talk about all the cool things you can make with these tools. And this is where I'm going to definitely dive in a little bit to the game dev side, like how you can use these specifically for making games. So first and foremost for me, slide background, right? I teach, which means I have a lot of slide decks, and I'm sick of picking the same old boring slide decks. It's like this background I made in DALL-E before this talk, right? All of my images, whenever I want to show like a man running, instead of going to a stock website, I make those images in these tools. It just, when you're presenting stuff, it helps to kind of have your own style, and being able to customize the exact piece of art you want, absolutely fantastic. So for those of you who have to present things occasionally, it's a wonderful tool. For games specifically, textures. So I've been having a lot of luck creating textures using these tools. So these were all made with the LAION model, the one that I showed the training set earlier of. So if you've ever done kind of your basic textures, wall textures, floor textures, rocks, it's fantastic for these, right? It's very good at doing that kind of basic patterns. They do struggle with making them actually seamless. MidJourney does some really cool stylized stuff. You can get some really cool like desktop backgrounds, or just kind of image cool like poster aesthetics, as well as like wallpaper, floors, all that good stuff. And of course, DALL-E does it as well. DALL-E does a fantastic job on wood floors. I don't know why, but it really gets that one fantastically, as well as carpets. So what I generally recommend for this is for game textures, you want them to be seamless. You don't want to have that kind of obvious connection point. So you have to remove those seams, hoping someday maybe a model will be trained specifically on tileable textures. I'm not saying I'm working on something like that, but it is something I've been maybe working on a little bit. So there are some cool ways to actually fix the seam, right? So I created this guide you can get access to, again, on the Discord. This is just a way to make it seamless using those tools. So if you've never done the sort of basic Photoshop offset trick, that's a way to do it with in-painting, which I'll show in a moment, to kind of really create a lot of variety of the same seamless texture. You can also throw them in this program Materialize. This will help you create normal maps, AO maps, all that good stuff. And then, of course, there's Substance 3D Sampler. This has a wonderful tutorial to make both tiling and just kind of good PBR materials out of these textures. So if you ever need specific textures, you need a really blue and white tile floor, done. Like you toss that prompt into MidJourney or DALL-E, you bring it into Materialize, you have yourself a game texture. So this is, again, one of those situations where, this is a very boring part of game dev. I don't think there's many people who love making tileable textures. If you do, amazing, you're going to have a job forever. But most people, this is not the favorite part of game dev. So it's kind of speeding up that process, making it more convenient, being able to pump out hundreds of varieties of the same texture. It's just something that these tools are great for. Next up, concept art. So I've already talked about how this is great for concept art. I'm not going to talk too much on this because, honestly, I think the first thing everybody does when they get their hands on these tools is make concept art, like medieval landscape, castle, knight with sword. A lot of people will create a lot of cool stuff. It's great for, if you do tabletops, if you're a D&D player, make a whole bunch of art using this, right? You can do it for a lot of things, whether it's for a game that you're making or just kind of hanging out with some friends. A lot of times I'll just see a cool skyline and I'll kind of throw the prompt in myself. So the things I want to talk about with concept art specifically are just some kind of quick tips. So the different tools have different aesthetics, as I showed with that comparison. If you're struggling to get the piece of concept art you want, try a different tool, right? You're using a hammer when you should be using a screwdriver. The variations can lead to really fun, interesting results. I find a lot of photography things saying lomograph photo, Polaroid photo, 35 millimeter, if I want something to be somewhat realistic, or concept art of, or find a specific artist. There's a guy, Peter Moorbacher, who makes a lot of the Magic the Gathering cards and does a lot of concept art. And he talked about his process with this and how it helps him reach styles he would otherwise never draw on his own, because it kind of gives him the starting space to work on something that he would otherwise not go for. And then also aspect ratios, right? In most of these tools, you can say a 2:1 ratio, 3:1, 16:9, and the output really changes based on those ratios. So if the square is not working, try landscape. Now I want to talk about my favorite part of this, which is concept in-painting and out-painting. So tools like DALL-E, a little bit with that ArtBreeder collage, they allow you to kind of expand an image. So if you see behind me here, I have this wonderful triptych, kind of 3 images. I tossed that into DALL-E, just kind of erased the seams, let it go, and I've turned it into one full image, right? This is a rather simple example of this, but with DALL-E, you can take an image and you can kind of erase an area and have it draw a new example of that. I'll show you kind of a live version of that. I have an image ready for this. So I did this piece in MidJourney, and you'll see here the face just didn't quite turn out, right? It's got a bit of a missing face situation. So I can just erase this area. And this was based on the classic Renaissance painting, A Boy in Blue. So I'm just going to give the prompt A Boy in Blue facing to the right. And then I'm going to generate. And it's just going to generate that in-painted area, just the area I erased. So everything else will stay exactly as is, or it's not going to work at all because DALL-E appears to be down right now. Let's try that again. I do have some examples of this ready if it fails. Are they in here still? Let's just hope it works. So yeah, you can kind of erase certain areas. You find an image that you didn't like one area to, you erase, you bring it into a tool like DALL-E, and you allow it to kind of generate a new instance. And what's great about that is you can give it a new prompt, right? So now we have 3 different faces. Like this one turned out so much better than what was there. Still has a little bit of problems. I would maybe erase just the nose and the eyes and try again. But again, it's very much an iterative process to get exactly what you want. I did this one earlier. This was just an image that I made of a purple tree. I erased one area of the sky and I added a giant eagle soaring overhead. So now I have 3 images with giant eagles. I can choose one from there, then maybe erase this area and say, you know, a horse and cart in the background, and then keep kind of adding pieces. The next really cool thing you can do with this is what's called outpainting. So with outpainting, you can kind of take a smaller image, bring it into DALL-E with some white space around it, erase that, give it alpha, tell it to generate. So this example, I took 2 of the maps from the game I'm working on. I seamed them together kind of where they had a connecting space, and then I let it generate out from there. So this is just DALL-E imagining what we could put in those areas of our game. So again, really useful for concepting. Our pixel artist will definitely go through and make that himself if we decide to use any of this, but it gives us some good ideas of kind of what could go there, how to kind of connect those seams in a lot of useful ways. Portraits, so this is a big one that's more recently become applicable. For the longest time, these tools have struggled with faces, and they're finally getting to a point where they're making good stuff. So ArtBreeder, again, built on one very specific aesthetic. It's very much just kind of face up, maybe a little bit of shoulder, but it can give you kind of different pitch and yaw on the face. And what's really nice about it as well is you have all those genes that I talked about earlier. And from those genes, you can kind of really tweak specific elements. Say, you know, I want everyone with black hair. I want them all very happy. And just kind of tweaking these things, you can kind of get exactly what you're after. Let's go with young. So you can do a lot of cool stuff with this one. As you can see, like, not always does it work out, but with tweaking those variables and choosing sort of a start, these kind of parents as they're called, you can get really exactly what you're after. And sometimes you will get absolute nightmares, which occurs, and that's kind of part of the AI world. MidJourney's doing a great job with portraits now. I would highly recommend for pretty much any portrait, but specifically MidJourney. You can download Face app, which is a mobile app, but you can get BlueStacks on Windows computers and kind of convince it that it's an Android device. And this lets you take a single image and kind of, you know, Photoshop filter or Instagram filter those faces. This is, you know, making it smile. This is, you know, smirk. You can change gender. You can change age. You can add a beard. But most importantly, if you have like offset eyes or just kind of a weird deformation of the face, FaceApp pretty much immediately fixes that, which is fantastic. Another fun one, so there's this site, myheritage.com. It's a sort of ancestry site where you know, find your relatives. But they have this tool where you can upload an image and it'll create an animation of the face. Now, of course, these are watermarked. I wouldn't necessarily say that these are great for a game. Again, you don't put it in the final production, but for concepting, for kind of ideation, this is cool just to kind of see the face looking around to get a feel for it. And to take that a next step further, the company that made that also has this tool on their site. It's pretty expensive for about 7 minutes of video. It's $50, but it can give you essentially text-to-speech voice on a portrait based on a single image.
Hello, I was made with DID Portrait Tool. This is available at their site, create.d-id.com.
So yeah, again, really cool stuff. I could see this potentially making it into production, you know, pay to remove the watermark, but having the sort of speaking avatar in the corner, this is your tutorial character, this is, you know, visual novel characters. There's a lot of possibility there where you can start with just a single image and then use AI to animate it, text-to-speech to get the voice, really do some fantastic stuff with it. Another important aspect for all of this is upscaling. A lot of these AI tools are giving you 256 by 256, 512s. A lot of times that's too small for what you want, right? So Gigapixel, this tool is fantastic for upscaling. It does a wonderful job, kind of a comparison of it to Photoshop. If you're really trying to upscale, if you're trying to get that print quality, you want a t-shirt, canvas, a poster, something like that, I'd highly recommend shelling out the $100 for Gigapixel. But if not, something like Photoshop works really well for just like 2x or kind of a small scale up. So it really depends on how big you need to get that quality. And again, if you're going to be painting over this yourself, if you're going to be doing just concept work with this, you probably don't need a 7,000 by 8,000 pixel image, right? Just 1,000 by 1,000 should do the trick. Some of the collab notebooks also have some upscaling. Specifically, the Jax Diffusion one has a really fantastic tool for upscaling. All right, so this is just a list of some of the other tools I didn't talk about. Night Cafe, Pixels, Crayon, which was formerly called DALL-E Mini, Wombo, which is just a real simple one that has a very interesting style. And then Visions of Chaos, which is just a really cool app that has all sorts of generative stuff. I feel like probably half the people in the demo scene world know of Visions of Chaos. It's super cool for all the things it does. This QR code is the same one as before, so if you missed it earlier, you can grab that. It's also in the seminars channel on the Discord, and you can get to it as well. And there's links for all this stuff. There's also a lot of stuff coming soon, right? Google has two tools, Party, which is not officially through Google, but it is Google employees that created it, and Imagen. Both of these are kind of the next evolutionary step in like the level of quality that can come out of the images. They've done a lot of tests to ensure that it kind of takes one step further. You'll notice it gets text right, which is a major game changer. But they've also tested it on some of those same issues I talked about before, negation, complexity, things like that. It seems to be performing better. And then Imagen, also from Google. This one, it's not much is known about it. It's still only internal to Google. So it's just what's on their site. But again, it gets text right. It gets complexity right. It does a lot of those things that I said currently these tools struggle with. There's also some other cool stuff coming. This textual inversion, the sort of text-to-text prompts. It allows you to sort of upload an image and then say, like, I want an app icon of that, right? You want a crocheted thing in the pose of Elmo. You can kind of take one element of an image and transfer it into something else instead of doing a full transfer of its whole aesthetic. Again, these links are all in the doc. All right. We're going to move through text and some audio with the last few minutes we have. I mostly covered images here because it's kind of the newest brand, fun, probably I'd say the most enjoyable thing to play with, but text has been around for quite a few years. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do with it, so I'm just going to briefly go through that, send you on your way to play with it. GPT-3, which has now been around for, I think, 2 years, and before it, GPT-2. This tool is wonderful for creating kind of babbling text. Tell me 10 great things about the assembly demo party. So yeah, it can quickly create a lot of kind of very simple stuff. You can see stuff in here. I would say probably most of these are true, if not all of them. But it's not coming out with anything that maybe you wouldn't know, right? It's not inventing kind of a whole new idea on why you would want to come check out assembly. But it is really just great for kind of playing with. What's really nice about it is then you can add, after it has given you a bit of text, you can then say one more thing and submit, oh, and the 11th thing, and then have it generate one more. So it can do a lot of very simple stuff like this. One of the important things to understand with GPT is the only context it has for what it's creating is what you've given it. It can do just kind of these long, incoherent essays. I asked it to tell me the importance of 19th century literature, and it just generated this. It even has spelling errors in it, which is fantastic. As a teacher, I'm frequently concerned on whether this is going to be used for sort of plagiarism. It also, like I said before, it has no context, right? I just asked it, how much medication was I supposed to take today? And it answers with what is actually a very safe answer of saying there's no definitive answer. I don't know, essentially. I can't tell you that. Then I gave it a schedule, and I asked how much I was supposed to take today. And it said I wasn't supposed to take any medication today, even though I wrote this on a Tuesday, and Tuesday said 1 dose, right? Because it has no context of what today is. GPT has no understanding of the current date because it was trained on a specific model at a specific point in time. It's not actively tracking today. So if I tell it what today is, tell it the schedule, then it gets it right. So again, it's all about how much context you give it, kind of how much of that back-end data for it to really pull off kind of a correct answer or what you would expect it to do. It's also really good for writing code. Part of the system that kind of training set was your sort of open code sources. So it'll generate kind of code files. You'll find a few bugs in it, some questionable kind of functions and variable names, but you can get some really good stuff with that. Which brings me to GitHub Copilot. GitHub actually created its own version of GPT working with AI, OpenAI's Codex. And what's really cool on this one is you can embed it right into whatever tool you're using. So you can actually have it similar to like when you're writing an email and it kind of tries to autocomplete. This is a great way to autocomplete code files. I find this fantastic as a coder for a lot of the stuff that you already know what you're going to write and you've done it before. This will pretty much provide the solution you need. So a couple tips and tricks. Again, as much context as you can fit. You have to pay for more tokens, so the more you give it, kind of the more it costs to run, but it's worth it to get the output you want. You can also increase the chaos, so there's a setting on GPT on kind of how wild it can get. The more context you give it, the wilder you can let its response get to get kind of strange, unexpected directions for its response. But that only really works if you've given it plenty of context. There's also a frequency penalty in those settings. And that just prevents it from kind of saying the same thing over and over. So when I asked it the top 10 reasons to attend assembly, it actually didn't really repeat that often. But if it just kind of said the same thing over and over, put that penalty up, it'll fix that from happening. This is an example, again, to go back to games. This is all the sort of basic barks and kind of filler voiceover work that I was working on for a game. And what I would do is I would give it a couple of those lines and then ask it to generate the next one, and I'd give it the context of that one. This is what you say when you solve the first puzzle while in the logic setting. And it had all the previous prompts and all the previous things it had also come up with for that. And sometimes I'd go in and tweak some wording, but it would help it generate the next one and create interesting results. They were a little bit varied from each other. And so this is great, again, for that kind of filler voiceover or dialogue where it's not the important text of your game, but it's just kind of filling that empty void. Great for that. So we got the last one, which is audio. Audio, in my opinion, is the last frontier of really good AI stuff. There's also 3D models for imagery, but I think that one's going to be solved closer than audio. Audio is just yet to hit that perfect spot. So there's a couple tools I'd like to show. Jukebox, which is made by OpenAI. Same company as GPT, same company as DALL-E. What's fantastic about this one, you give it some lyrics, you give it a band, you give it a sort of genre, you let it go. You can get 30 to 60 second tools. This is, again, Google Colab, so you pay that $10 a month. You get this, Disco Diffusion, all those cool tools as well. It works, but I will say voices especially, it's very garbled. It's very kind of hard to make out the specific lyrics, but it does the beats really well. A lot of the things I've been reading about, kind of papers and people researching this, they're looking at separating vocals from instruments. So you have one generator for instruments, one generator for vocals, similar to how ArtBreeder has like the portrait one and the landscape one, just to kind of help ensure that the voice comes out clear and concise. Boomy, this is a really cool, simple one. So this actually allows you to not only generate music, but like one click add it to Spotify. So like I've made all these songs, I came up with a fake artist name, and I can list them all on Spotify as an artist. So it's a lot of good EDM, trance, lo-fi. Like I pretty much have made my own lo-fi list of tracks at this point. And it's a very easy to use tool. That's just boomy.com. There's also a lot of text-to-speech. This is kind of I think an obvious one. It's been around for a while. This is why things like Alexa and Siri work so well. Murph is a really good one for kind of generating your own bits of text. It allows you to not only have the statements, but you can kind of tweak the cadence, change emphasis. You can really get hands-on on getting the exact sound. But more importantly, you can upload your own voice. You can just record yourself saying something and then have it convert it to an AI voice, which you can get a lot of really cool kind of, change the timbre of your voice, make yourself sound more robotic, make yourself sound like you have an accent, do a lot of really interesting things with it. And then there's these two tools, Lucid Sonic Dreams and Pidy. These allow you to kind of do audio reactive stuff. So if you want to take like a song and a music video and just kind of create it so it's kind of vibing, this is very much demo scene world. I would say the Pidy tools especially. You can import audio to this and make a video that is reactive to the audio using your basic text-to-image prompts to create the frame, and then an audio that it kind of responds to and vibes to. So those are great for, again, kind of the demos and really interesting, just cool aesthetic stuff. So how are we doing on time? We got a few minutes. I definitely want to leave some time for questions. Just some people to follow on Twitter. I'm going to make sure these folks are all in my doc as well. These are some of the folks really kind of moving this space forward. I'm QWERTYML is just kind of my specific Twitter handle for all the fun AI stuff. I have a big list of, these are just some more links that are helpful. I run a Facebook group for AI-generated art, which you can find there on the doc that I provided as well. And this is that QR code, again, to grab that doc. And I'm done. Thank you all for joining me on this. I hope this was helpful. I hope you got something out of it. I try to cover a lot here because there's just so much new stuff coming. Half of the tools I've shown have only been available for like a month or two, so it's never ending constantly. This morning I woke up to a new announcement. I had to change my slides today. That's kind of how fast it's changing. So I hope you got something from this, and thanks for letting me hang out with you.
Thank you, Tyler. Whoa, what a pile of information you were sharing. So maybe I'll go to the stage. So for those who didn't get it, so you can also get the Megadoc from the Discord, so assembly, Discord, discussions, seminars, and also you can post your creations there if you please. Unfortunately, we can't take questions at this point as we need to move on to the last speaker of today.
Okay.
But that's also a good reason to continue the discussion at Discord. Thanks again, Tyler.
Thank you.